FNAF 4 is not a good mystery story. We cannot even agree on its purpose and theories go into very different directions. It shouldn't be that way. But it's been 9 years and we've got plenty of additional hints elsewhere. There is Sister Location, Survival Logbook, Encyclopedia, Nyctophobia. Even the week before brings up both the bite and the victim. Surely we have all the pieces now. Surely we can solve it once and for all, right? It still doesn't feel that way. And many people claim that Scott cannot solve it either. But give him just a little credit. Teenagers can make coherent FNAF fan games, and Scott went to art school. He made several games and movies before. He can do a little bit more than your usual FNAF fan game. The problem is not coherence. FNAF 4 is just not a good mystery story. It has meaning, but only Scott Cawthon understands it properly. But I think there is something we can do. We're trying to solve the big secrets, like the box, the experiment, the ghosts, William's motivation, fun times and nightmare gas. Instead, we should establish the fundamental story of FNAF 4. Can you explain the basic themes or goals of FNAF 4? We don't discuss that enough, and that leads to so many clashing explanations. If we establish the basics, I'm sure you can understand FNAF 4 and see it as just a story. Believe me, the root of our problems are the basics. Without them, our theories stray very far in many insane directions. There is Dream Theory, where all of the story was only a dream. There is Golden Victim, where the boy is Golden Freddy, surrounded by the other victims. There is Mikebot. The boy is Mike Schmidafton and William brought him back to life as a machine. These were all popular and reasonable theories at the time, but they were all very different from each other. We never found the core point of the story, and we have nothing to use as a reference. If there's no core, every insane theory can feel reasonable. To emphasize the problem, think of the Dreamer. Survival Logbook explains that Mike Afton saw the nightmares, as he drew Nightmare Fredbear. That led us to Mike Victim Mikebot theory, and it felt like the only solution. But it wasn't. We learned other ways to look at the drawings, and now we know the Bite Victim cannot be Mike. Nowadays, many believe that William experimented on the older brother, and it is a decent conclusion supported by the Survival Logbook and Sister Location. But how were we supposed to solve that? How did we move from a traumatized boy all the way to the experiments conducted on his brother? How does that connect to the story at hand? We don't know the answer because we don't know the story. Take a look at that. When Scott wrote FNAF 4, he created a structure of the story's progression and secrets. There is a core of the story, and everything grows from that point. That includes Mike's purpose in the story. Let's say the structure of the Dreamer storyline looks like this. But we never found anything like that. We are using the Survival Logbook as the core of our theories. Our understanding is something more like that. That's the intended story and that's the story we understand. If the core point of a theory comes from external media, we solved nothing. We didn't connect the theory to the story and we missed a lot of context. The drawing doesn't give us direct answers. We know that Mike knows of Nightmare Fredbear in the context of dreams, not experiment but dreams. We can guess that maybe he was the experiment subject, or that William showed him the experiment, or that Bite Victim drew the monster first and Mike was making fun of it, or maybe he dreamed up that monster on his own. All of these scenarios can make for plausible theories, but that's the wrong approach. We shouldn't guess. We should take the suggestion from the logbook and then carve the path from the core of the story all the way to Mike. And that will be the correct answer. I want you to think of the basics. You don't have to agree with my conclusions, but give it a try. Write your own thoughts. We really need to define a structure around the story. What is FNAF 4 about? If you could compress all of the story into a single word or a sentence, what would it be? A good answer is the Bite Victim. The three popular theories I mentioned all revolve around his identity. The game clearly talks about that kid. The minigames show his life, his trauma, bullying. We can see a few days of his life leading to the birthday party. We can see his plushy friends who stay close to him before and after the bite. The game builds many mysteries around him. Why is he so traumatized? What's the deal with his magical plushy friend? What happens to him after death? What do the words "I will put you back together" mean? The bite victim is a central point of the story and everything should tie back to him. That's the core of the story. And because of that, Mike shouldn't be the subject of the experiment. Even if you say that William punished him for killing his younger brother, that's not really the story at hand, it's a very weak connection. Everything should be relevant to the bite victim. Another good answer is terror. The story revolves around a kid being bullied in various ways. It talks about trauma as the kid bursts into tears whenever he has to come closer to the stage with animatronics. The nightmares are also connected to his fears. Plushies are good, machines are bad. Nightmare Foxy parallels the older brother. Experiment or not, when we're talking about the basics of the story, the nightmare was constructed to mirror the daily life of the kid, and it needs to connect to the bite victim. But there's more terror in the story. The kid was traumatized by something from the past. The kid is being bullied as we see their daily life, and he's eventually brought to the animatronic he incredibly fears, and he's mortally beaten. He was terrorized day after day, and that defines him. He cannot move on because he's still crying. He's broken. That suffering leads to his afterlife. One more answer I want you to consider is the phrase Scott used as a hint. 4 games, 1 story. The point of FNAF 4 is to tie everything together into a tetralogy. It wasn't one story before, but it is now. FNAF 4 should respect and expand on the story established in the previous games. The core of the story should talk about ghosts. The way I see it, FNAF 4 discusses the connection between emotions and the paranormal. Bite victim will become a ghost because of the horrors he experienced before, and his soul will connect to the other games to tie them together. Dream Theory never respected past games, as it removes the paranormal from the story altogether. You should tie bite victim into the series, but you need to keep its meaning intact. And that's the core. That is enough. We might still argue about Plush Fredbear or The Experiment or Golden Freddy, but that's already a story. That's already not a confusing, pointless mess. FNAF 4 tells the story of suffering, so immense it leads to possession. William's victims possessed the animatronics because they were hurt, betrayed. Something was stolen from them and they needed it back. But the bite victim story is much more intense. The machine that traumatized him later killed him and he cannot stop crying. He's not reacting to words of comfort. He will become a ghost, relevant in 4 games 1 story, and if that's true, that's the entire basis of the story of FNAF 4. We might not know everything yet, but we have a good understanding of the premise, the purpose and the themes of the story. We know what Scott tried to convey. Get someone new to play FNAF 1. If they know the phone calls, understand the topic of possessed animatronics and that the pizzeria is closing soon, they already know the story and they can theorize further. We can discuss the words "It's me" or the year of FNAF 1 or Mike's motivation, etc. That's how I treat the core point of FNAF 4. That's already half of the story. I also want to make one more claim. Bite Victim is a new character, because the core we created is something entirely new to the series. It doesn't expand on the established events, it's not referring to the missing children incident, it's not the Bite of 87, it's not the puppet either. Scott doesn't ignore established lore. He adds to it when necessary, as we can see with FFPS, but when he needs a new character, he creates a new incident. I believe the Bite Victim should always be treated as the new kid. The 7th main victim in the story of Five Nights at Freddy's, a mysterious soul who doesn't seem to possess anything, yet it's very relevant in the overall story. Why did Mike draw Nightmare Fredbear in the logbook? Because the Bite Victim interacts with the other games. The game shows a clear connection between the Nightmare and the Bite Victim's trauma, but it also leads us to 1993 with the fungi Easter egg. I believe that the Bite Victim's soul interacted with Mike during his night shift in FNAF 1 and he directly saw the trauma of his own brother in a dream. Scott connected the game to Mike to establish 4 games 1 story. That's how I would draw that connection. It explains the logbook drawing in a proper context. Its core point comes from FNAF 4. That's how I want to solve the story. Of course, that's hardly enough to solve all of FNAF 4, but that would be a necessary bare minimum. Scott didn't just write anything. There is a structure, that's how I see it. That's why it's essential to discuss the basics instead of focusing on external media. The survival logbook and Dictophobia were created so we could start over and see the story in a different light. But there are still plenty of mysteries. What is Bite Victim's involvement in the experiment? What exactly is the connection between his birthday party and the happiest day? How were we supposed to add the purple guy into the story? I have more ideas on how to solve FNAF 4, but I want to keep it one topic at a time. Give it a try. Ignore the bigger story for a moment and focus on the basics. Next, I want to discuss parallels. I think there are very specific connections between the Bite Victim and every other game in 4 games, 1 story.